It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast, talking property news right across your weekend. We do it 7 days a week, as heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. Into the last day of the month. Yes, June the 30th today for our Sunday. Hope your weekend is going well, no matter what you are up to. Maybe it's going a lot better than Joe Biden. Gee, the debate on Friday didn't go too well for Joe. Got that sort of frozen look on his face. Very hard to sort of recover from that. But then the very next day, he looked like a energized new man. So I think my prediction is going to be that he will remain the nominee. In America, of course, there's all this talk about replacing Joe Biden after the debate. I don't think they can because of the way that it's all set up in the US. So my prediction is he'll be the nominee and will sweep to power in the November elections. I think he's the one to beat Donald Trump somehow. Well, coming up in just a moment, we're going to reflect back on yet again another very busy week. We started on Monday talking with James Briggs about the process about building modular versus traditional buildings. And then we caught up with Veronica Morgan talking about the dangers of investors using only data when making a property buying decision. Nick Buick was here. He was talking about the role of an on-site manager. And we also caught up with Michelle May, a buyer's agent in Sydney. This was pretty interesting. She was talking about the mum and dad property banks that can pose some pretty tricky situations for buyer's agents. And we will bring you a slice of that, all part of our Sunday morning.
From buying strategies, a fluctuating market, the importance of data, geographical differences, confidence in the market, rental yields. Stay informed every morning from 6 a.m.
We're talking to James about modular buildings. And so, James, 60 square metres, as you were saying just before the break, it's a pretty generous size. You can get a couple of bedrooms. And as I mentioned at the top, Simon Kustamara, he's a person that is really advocating for these large-scale, high-tech factories. It's the way to go, isn't it, in terms of, outputting them far greater than building them on site?
Oh, it definitely is. And a perfect size module is around 60 square metres because your constraints are typically the route that it's going to take from the factory to the site. So mainly the width on the road. So 5 metre wide, 12 metre long is a perfect size module. And you can get everything you need into that.
Yeah. How does it all go? Like, how does it work at your end? So if I was to say, okay, James, I want one of these 60 square metre modules, how long is it going to take you to sort of build a 2-bedroom for me?
So it depends on where you are in the production line. Typically, there's a little bit of a wait to get to the production line, depending on the workflow that we've got going on. But once your module is on the production line, we have 8 working stations. Each module spends 4 days in each working station. So 32 business days later, you'll go from nothing to a completed home.
So what would it take if you're building that on site? 32 days in your factory on site?
32 days and it's ready to transport to site. Yep. The same sort of construction on site. Obviously, you're affected by weather. You're affected by how you can get material in and out. You're affected by neighbours and then noise pollution to neighbours. There's a lot of external factors, whereas in the factory, all of those factors are taken away. We've got plenty of power at our fingertips. We've got elevated working platforms. We've got gantry cranes. We've got forklifts, plenty of power for the welders. There's nothing stopping us. And if we fall behind, we can run an afternoon shift and we can make sure we stay on schedule. And it's in our best interest and everyone's best interest to stay on schedule because there's jobs coming in behind. So it's a moving production line, and your project is important, but also the projects behind are important. So we need to maintain the process and keep up the speed. So if you put in an order, 32 days later, it will be ready.
James, you're ahead of the curve here because you were saying to me off air I think you came out of your apprenticeship, you were saying 2008, and you were a traditional builder, and you saw the light and you decided, hey, this is the space that I want to be in.
I actually had a number of things converge at one time. I did a trip to China and went to a bunch of factories over there researching it. And I had 23 guys. I was traveling around doing conventional construction and I needed to be everywhere at once. I got my helicopter pilot's license to try and be everywhere at once. And then ultimately it was a fast track to burnout. I burnt out and spent a couple of years in and out of hospital, seven admissions. And I think that process showed me I need to get these jobs that I was traveling around to within walking distance from my desk. That was sort of the process that led me to modular construction, and was forced to in a way, but also at the same time was researching it all. And I just can't believe how far behind Australia are.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about the Chinese factories that you went over and had a look at, because just recently over the last 12 months, there's been quite a push online, and you would have seen these pods that they are making, and I'm not sure what the output is, but they look like pretty big factories, and they are exporting around the world, which kind of makes you wonder, why aren't we doing this in Australia?
Yeah, exactly. I think Australian regulation and red tape is pretty vigorous. That's sort of stopped a lot of the import. People do import them from China and so forth, but then they find out they don't meet our standards with the wiring and the watermark on the taps and the like. So I think we're primed to make manufacturing great again in Australia, and you have to be a registered practitioner within the state that you're delivering to. So I think the space is definitely going to grow because our red tape is more stringent than other countries and our design codes are more stringent. We can potentially export from Australia.
From first-time home buyers to seasoned investors to breaking property news, discover the stories behind the real estate.
The data not being trusted, it's the right mix of the whole local knowledge in the local neighbourhood mixed with the data. That's what you're saying.
That's exactly right. I think data has a purpose. And look, in reality, property data really reflects what has happened in the past. So in order to really make good decisions in the future, you need to understand what's happened in the past and be able to make a judgment call as to whether that in fact can continue into the future or whether it will change. And this is what a lot of people, I guess, they misunderstand too. They think that the data of what happened in the past will automatically predict what happens in the future. Or they might look at things like incomes, for example, without understanding, well, what does that mean? You know, how do you look at incomes on its own? Do you look at the demographic of who lives there? Do you look at the incomes of the people who are buying there? Is it incomes of investors buying in? Or is it incomes of owner-occupiers within that area pushing prices? Like there's all these different nuances that you need. And you need to have a really solid understanding of data and be able to critically assess the data that you are using to build your decisions on. But when you're on the ground, you'll find that a lot of that macro information, it doesn't actually apply on the ground, because the sort of property that is very, very hotly contested in an area is not going to come out in data. That is only something that local knowledge will teach you.
Yeah, and just coming back to that point, if you don't know the local area and you're one of these new buyer's agents, what do? You turn to the data. And of course, the person that is engaging with this particular person with no local knowledge will probably have more local knowledge without realising it.
And could be the case. And in fact, I've got so many examples of people that have bought in areas and then discovered things afterwards that locals knew about that area. And if they had known about that, they never would have bought that property. I was talking to an investor recently who'd bought in an area where there was a lead smelter. What they didn't know when they bought this property was that there's this zone where kids can't live. So they thought they were buying an investment property that families of people working at the lead smelter would be able to rent. And then afterwards, they discovered that, families can't live there because kids aren't allowed to live there because the soil's contaminated and so is the air. They didn't know that.
Gosh.
Locals knew that. Locals know that. But somebody who's not from the area, it wouldn't even occur to them. If you've never lived in a place that's had that as an issue, why would you even think about it?
Exactly.
And so that's the sort of example that I'm talking about that happens all the time. Another one, I've spoken to somebody else recently who bought in a flood zone. She actually lived in the area, but not in this particular suburb. She couldn't understand why this property had passed in at auction. She thought it was so cute and all the rest of it. And then they went ahead and bought it without realising that the solicitor said, oh, just warning you, it isn't a 1 in 100-year flood zone. And they thought that meant that it might flood once every 100 years, made a total mistake. Then every time it flooded, there was a creek behind the house, and every time it rained, I should say, she'd lie awake at night, absolutely petrified that they were going to get a call, because there were situations where cars would get carried off down the street. Like it was dire.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason it passed in, because all the locals knew that. She's come in and she only lived about 4-5 suburbs away, but she didn't know that.
Know your property with us on the Real Estate Podcast.
When they do come to you, it might be the mum and dads, is it, as opposed to the kids wanting to engage with a buyer's agent?
Yes, definitely. We've definitely seen a rise in inquiries from the parents first. By and large, most first home buyers are assisted with parental backup, whether that's in the form of a guarantee, a gift, or an interest in the property, because, the facts are that property has become almost unaffordable. So if you're a first home buyer struggling to do it on your own, you're competing with other people of your age who are then backed up by, a generation that has a lot of power behind them. So we're definitely seeing that happening more and more on the ground as well.
So mum and dad, they get in contact with you. I'm really interested in the dynamics here. Mum and dad, they call you, you do a bit of a round table, you sit down with the children that are actually buying the property with the help of mum and dad. That first up meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's probably a lot of questions coming from the parents about, what if this, what if that? Is that right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And it adds a layer of complexity for us as buyer's agents, because we really need to ascertain who are the real decision makers, how much autonomy do the children actually have. Because I actually recently had to fire clients because the parentals were getting way too involved and were vetoing properties that the child would actually go for. It became impossible to navigate because they really hadn't sorted out between themselves what the sort of the hierarchy was going to be. So I think when parents are thinking about helping their children, they do have to think about these things up front, have the hard conversations up front. For example, even thinking long term, when it comes to selling, are they going to take a part of the profit? Or if there's a partner involved as well, how do they structure this? So I think it would be prudent for them to potentially speak to a solicitor, think about the financial setup before they just go out and start looking at property by themselves.
Hey, that is really interesting what you said about taking profit share out of the property. I've never heard that one. I mean, you'd be looking at your mum and dad and saying, really, you want to take profit share out of the house?
We're talking about large amounts of money in general. Parents are contributing usually, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands to the property transaction. And potentially they are taking this as equity out of their own property, savings for their retirement. So if they want a piece of that in future times, then, you need to have had that conversation up front, because we all know that once money gets involved, people can do strange things, even if you are related. As I said before, if there's a partner involved as well, what if they split up and have to sell the property? Do they then give the gift back to the parents, or how does that all work? So you really got to look at it from all angles and not just go, yeah, it'll be all right. Because as I said, there's a lot of money involved in the transaction.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of mum and dad with the daughter. They want to help her get into the property. Her partner or husband, they've always looked down on this as not being good enough for their daughter. I can imagine that dynamic is very interesting to sort of dissect and be in the middle of as a buyer's agent.
Absolutely. And that's why, we've really learned how to have these conversations up front and really understand the nitty-gritty. And we do ask the difficult questions, even if the family themselves feel uncomfortable about it, because you need to have that open line of communication, the transparency for a buyer's agent to really be able to do their best job. We do have parents coming to us as well and say, listen, your services are our gift to our children, and we're going to be at arm's length because your job as a buyer's agent is to help our children find and buy the best possible property for their budget. So I think that in many ways is probably the most effective way of working together. But we have said no to parents who have inquired in the past as well, because we just thought, no, this has got all the markers of the red flags. We think this is just simply not going to work. So yes, as a buyer's agent, this has definitely added a level of complexity that we in previous years never had before.
That's right. Yeah, the bank of mum and dad is alive and kicking these days. It's getting harder and harder to buy your first place. I know the government's bringing in a lot of policies at the moment to help first home buyers, and yeah, it's definitely a trend that we'd love to see more of.
You know, one of the big downsides for parents is that they have children living at home in some cases indefinitely. They can't get rid of them because they can't afford to get into a property and the rents are too high.
Yeah, that's right. It's not easy out there at the moment. You know, prices are only going north. We're seeing a lot of first home buyers actually purchasing traditionally rent properties. So properties that normally people would buy as a rental property. A lot of first home buyers now are acquiring those properties to live in as owner occupiers. It's definitely something that's happening at the moment. It is hard to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So it's time to educate ourselves right now about management rights. Some will say, what is that exactly? Others will say it sounds complicated, but it is an area that more and more Aussie investors are turning to. So every month we are going to break it down piece by piece. What is it all about? What are the moving parts? And by the end of each discussion, I hope that it will become a little less complicated and become more transparent, because I guess our role in all of this is we talk to the experts, they break it all down into easy to understand pieces of knowledge and information. So, Nick, let's start with what might sound like a basic question, but probably most of our listeners won't know what the answer is, and that is, who pays for the on-site manager?
Yeah, exactly. I know when I bought my first property, it's a while back now, but I moved into a strata complex and I had no idea about management rights or who was paying the on-site manager. He was just a man who lived in the building and seemed to have an office there, and that was about as much as I knew. And I was paying him. And the reality is every on-site manager, that they get their income in two ways. Firstly, they get it in commission from their rentals that they manage, whether it be a holiday complex or a permanent complex. Most on-site managers will manage lots within that scheme. So they get commission from that, which is a variable salary. It's based on performance and how well they can manage those lots. And then the second half of their income comes from their caretaking salary. And that's a fixed income that's agreed with between the manager and the body corporate. The length of that agreement varies by state. In Queensland, it can be up to 25 years for that agreement. So it's a fairly solid, predictable income that is based on what they have to do in their contract. In that capacity, the body corporate pays the manager, and then the lot owners that agree to allow the manager to manage their lots also pay the manager.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.